We are back. 978-454-4980. Beneath the Surface, WCAP here till 11 o'clock. And then after that, Cindy's Vinyl Vault. You don't want to miss that. Okay, on Beneath the Surface tonight, we're delving beneath the surface on the question of what does it mean to be a person? This notion of personhood. And so far, we talked about the notion that it is a subject with intellect and will that is able to understand, seek meaning. Persons seek meaning. That's one of the trademarks of what it means to be a person. We come out of the womb after mama and dada, and maybe no. The fourth word virtually all human beings say is why.
And they say it for about 1 to 2 years straight.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Sometimes it's what, sometimes it's why. What and why, meaning and purpose. Think about that. What means meaning, why means purpose. We are meaning seekers and purpose seekers as persons.
Yeah, we're instinctive philosophers.
Yeah. Which points to the fact that we are more than simply physiological bodies that live on instinct, programmed to survive. We certainly are. We need to eat, and at least a certain amount of us need to procreate in order to survive. But we are more than that, and that's what we're talking about tonight, the meaning of personhood. Before the break, we were saying some of the distinctions between animals and persons, and the relationship to time and space that we have is different than that of the animal. Whereas the animal is confined to the perceptual presence, they're also confined to their immediate environments.
They are.
That is their entire reality. Now, if you're a baby or a little kid, sometimes that's the case with you too, right? Your entire reality, all you know, is your home or your yard or your sandbox, right, or your bed.
Sure.
But of course, when we mature, we get to understand that even if we don't see it, there's a whole world out there that we're not perceiving.
That's right. They still have the potential for the intellect and will. And of course that goes to the point you brought up a little earlier. You know, for example, people in a persistent vegetative state,
yes,
in coma, maybe someone who wasn't fully developed, that still the potency is there. Their nature is still there as a human being.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because a lot of people today would challenge whether a person in a persistent vegetative state is actually still a person, or whether an embryo or a fetus a human being in their embryonic state is actually a person.
Sure.
So tell me about what you mean by their nature is a person and they have the potentiality to be an adult person.
Well, that's right.
What does that mean?
Well, I would, if you don't mind, I'd like to borrow a little something from Ricardo Montalban of Fantasy Island fame.
Yes.
This is much later in his life. His health had gone, stopped doing all the entertainment. No longer was he playing con. And someone asked him, says, well, you know, how do you know that the person in the womb is real? He says, well, if you take away, because he was a devout Catholic, if you take away my faith, you take all this other stuff, I'm just going to use my reason. He says, when was I? And they go back in time. Was it now? Was it at a certain point in time? Was it, when I was born, when it was in the womb? He says, I go all the way back to the moment that I was conceived, and that is when I was I. Yeah,
and we have ultrasound sonography now. And the way I do it in my classroom is I take them as an adult, and I say, 10 years ago, when you were, say, 15, and when you pointed to a picture, could you truly say that was you? They say, yes. Well, what about a picture of you when you were 10? Yes. How about a 3-year-old picture? Yes. How about 2 days after you were born? If you would have pointed that picture, is that you? They would say yes. And then some are lucky enough to have ultrasounds, right? Because they live in the ultrasound world today, era. And so what about that ultrasound that your mother took when you were, say, 6 months after conception? Was that you? How about 4 months after conception? If you were to point to that. And what if we had the technology to take ultrasounds that are 3 to 1 day after your conception? if you were to point to that picture, is that you? And of course they'd have to say, yes, the moment that I began to exist was my conception, and the moment that I ceased to exist, at least as a body-soul composite, is the moment of my death. And scientifically, there is no arbitrary point between those 2 points that you can say that there is no person there.
That's right. At the moment of conception, the entire package of DNA is right there. I mean, it's in seed form. And think of it like an oak tree, right?
Yeah.
You get this mighty oak tree, and you get this little acorn. Well, at some point, that oak tree was a tiny little acorn in seed form. But then, given the right environment, all the DNA that ultimately became that mighty oak tree sprung from that one little seed.
But first, it becomes a bush, an oak bush.
That's
and
right.
Then a shrubling.
That's
and
right.
Then, what's the next word?
Oh, a sapling.
Sapling.
Would be, yeah.
I don't know my tree
But all these various
stages of growth, sure. Well, what about the end of life? A lot of people would argue that once the higher brain function ceases, the person can no longer utilize that part that we talked about that distinguishes us from all other animals, the intellect and the will. They're in a persistent vegetative state. Are they still, can we rightly still point at them and say that is a person?
Well, even to a certain degree less than that, and probably much more common, is someone elderly with dementia.
Yes.
Which is not too uncommon. I'm sure at some point people listening to this would probably known or do know someone who has it. And so would you say that person is no longer a person because they don't have the full capacity of their intellect?
So as long as the person isn't alive and they're not being, excuse me, they're not being fully kept alive by a machine, if their vital signs still are working or still have hope, then you'd have to at least assume, if not know, the person still exists.
Yes, the person still exists, even if the capacity of everything isn't working to its fullness the way that we know it. They're still a person.
Now, your personhood, or your person, is your identity, yes?
Yes.
Okay, suppose you tomorrow get hit in the head and you get permanent amnesia. You don't remember a darn thing about who you are or anything else past that. Are you still John Tudorus?
Still am.
You're still John Tudorus. I know you're a generic person.
Yeah.
But somebody would say, well, he's no longer John Tudorus because all of his memories are wiped out.
He's not the John that I knew. He's a little different. You know, and to some degree, they're right. They're right. You know, I don't talk the same way I did. I can't carry on the same conversations that I did. But the essence of who I am still has not changed. So we would say that there's damage to the material interface, if you will, of my personhood.
The brain.
Maybe my brain has some brain damage, but my spirit itself, the animating spirit, is still there.
So you're still John. You wouldn't have to change your name.
Yeah.
Even though you don't remember a darn thing.
Yeah, and actually, in ancient philosophy, they would say that the spirit is actually the real repository of our memories and intellect, not just, it's not the brain. And so we could almost reason from that even a person who isn't functioning properly here, in the material world, spiritually, they're actually there.
They're still there.
Their memory's there. Everything is intact.
You know, we have been so inundated by the philosophy of materialism that so many people think that when or if the brain is damaged and those personal faculties are no longer operable, the person themselves no longer exists. And you would say that's folly.
I would very much say that's folly. Absolutely. And
all right, go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah. No, you go ahead.
All right, I was going to challenge you on this because, as you know, 100 years ago, it was, nobody dreamed of the possibility of a heart transplant, or any body transplant, really, all right? There is now, there are now doctors seriously talking about performing head transplants.
Yes.
There is one who is going to do it in Russia, and I think because of their medical laws or what have you, I think he's going to do it in China now. But there is a man who is a paraplegic, hasn't been able to move in years, but his brain is still healthy. And he's hoping that this doctor, and this doctor is hoping to do it, to take his head and place it on the body of somebody who died and is brain dead, but quickly, because of course the organs deteriorate very quickly. And so somebody who dies and who is brain dead, they would switch the heads and the bodies. They put the healthy head on the healthy body, and the question is if this does in the future, and there's no evidence that this will ever happen to human beings, but if it does, who wakes up from that operation? The person of the original head, or the person of the original body with a new head?
Pure speculation, but I'll say the wherever the head resides.
Really?
There the person goes.
Now, doesn't that contradict what you said a little earlier about the personhood being in the spirit itself and not necessarily in the head?
Right, and I would agree with that. But in so much as that it would appear that if this something is something that could be successfully done, the intellect is moving, and the intellect resides in the spirit. So I would say that ethically, I don't think it should ever be attempted.
Right.
But if it were to happen somehow successfully, then most likely what you would see, the way I would think it is, that it would actually be the person where the head came from.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So the identity, the personhood, you would say, is more prominent
Yes.
in a person's head
Yes.
than it is in the rest of their body.
I would say yes.
Okay.
But even then, how does that really work in relation to
How in the world?
spirit, which doesn't necessarily have by its nature
Yes.
material essence? I mean, humans are different, of course. But for example, if when someone dies and they're a disembodied soul and they have no matter at that moment, what do they look like? We don't know.
Well, of course, matter, spirit doesn't have a look.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we only have, about 5 minutes left. What direction would you like to go with this question? What is a person?
So now that we've explored pretty well the nature of what a person is, so just to recap, they have spirit, intellect, will. When it comes to human persons, that they're a hylomorphic reality, meaning they're a spirit matter composite.
Okay.
That there's this intimate union between the two. So when you get to certain social ideas that are somewhat prominent now, for example, like your LBGT, let's take the idea of transgender, right?
Okay.
So there's this idea that somehow, because a person feels that they are one gender versus another, even though their biological sex communicates something different, that it's almost like this dualism, right?
Yes.
That they say, well, on the inside, my spirit, I feel feminine, even though my body is male.
Yeah.
But that again ignores this union of who they are as a person.
As we said earlier, body-soul dualism would be fitting for reincarnation, but it would also be fitting for this notion of transgenderism.
It would, and by extension, I would also add the lesbian, the gay, even bisexual, in the sense that, so for example, the whole human person is geared towards, how do you create a new person? Well, you have males, you have females, and then they come together. So what is real love, right?
Right.
So love has to be in order towards truth.
If you believe that the body has meaning,
yes,
then none of those things rationally make any sense.
They wouldn't, because how can one give fully of themselves, not just in their intellect and their will, but also physically too, if there's no compatible parts to do so?
Right. But if you're a dualist, you might think, erroneously we believe, that the body has no meaning to it.
Exactly.
It's just we create all the meaning that we want.
So if I say it doesn't matter what someone is, I can love, if I'm Sue, I can love Sally, right? Well, or I can just marry the tree because I love the tree.
Well, I think this is huge. You're putting on something. You're talking about something huge that we do a whole show on, and that is the repercussions of just the consequences of these models of what it means to be a human person.
Yes, and
if it's dualist, then you can do whatever you want with your body for the sake of pleasure, because it's not really you. It's just an object or a thing that you can use and manipulate. However, if you believe, like we do, that the human being, the human person, is a body-soul composite, then the you, the person, is manifested through the physical body because they're one.
And I would add, yes, and with that, it's important to say that there's an objective nature to that human person.
And an objective meaning to human acts and behaviors.
Exactly, and that would just lead to, I suppose, something that's less, it's always been in fashion, if you will, as far as throughout all of human histories, and that's things like economies and war, right?
Okay.
So if we have a good understanding of the human person and we respect that, well, inherent in that is the natural law that's built into us, right? For example, don't steal from someone, don't murder someone, right? Greed is bad, universally, no matter what religion, culture, time, place. These things are universal.
So if human persons have an objective nature, meaning that their body is actually essentially a part of them, and all bodily acts have objective meaning to them. If bodies have meaning, and they're not simply a covering, then what you're saying makes sense.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
there is a natural law that all human beings must adhere to fundamentally in order to flourish and be happy.
That's correct. That's correct. And by happy, we mean to come to a full fruition of who they're meant to be by their nature.
Your potential is actualized, to say it another way.
That's right. Potential is actualized. We become more fully who we are meant to be.
Very interesting. It has a lot of ramifications, this, and what it means to be a person,
It does.
particularly a human person.
Almost every single action that we can think of that we do stems from our nature.
And our understanding of who and what we are.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for listening tonight Beneath the Surface here at WCAP. What is a person? Paul Morano signing off with my guest this week, Mr. John Tudoris. Hope you have a great week, everybody, and we will delve beneath the surface with you next week. So long.